Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the 20th day of July 2025. And I have this from the Gospel of Matthew. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And while he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Today's reading is about a rather strange event experienced by the inner circle of the disciples. Jesus invited Peter, James, and John on a small retreat up at the top of a mountain, probably at 9,000 feet. Since that is about the highest that a mountain can get in Palestine. The disciples see Jesus' appearance change. His face was shining and his clothes were a dazzling white. When Moses had been up on the mountain and had talked to God, his face shone. And so this is the implication, that Jesus had been talking with God. And then immediately the disciples saw Moses and Elijah hanging out with Jesus, and the 3 of them were talking. Why Moses and Elijah? Well, scholars say that according to Jewish tradition, Moses and Elijah were both taken up into heaven, quote unquote, at the end of their life and never went through the messy process of dying. According to tradition, their physical remains had never been found for either one of them, and so they had a special place. Here we have this amazing moment, and Jesus is transformed. Jesus hobnobbing with Moses and Elijah, 2 of the greatest figures of Jewish religion and Jewish history. It was an absolutely transcendent moment, and in Christian circles, this is the Transfiguration. I think we underestimate Peter's ability to take the lead with his mouth in gear, but before his brain is warmed up and ready. Peter says, "Hey, teacher, I've got a great idea. I'll build 3 booths, temporary shelters, up here on the mountain so you and Moses and Elijah can each have a cool little lean-to to sit in. And maybe I could take just one picture with each of you 3, each in the little house that I'll make for you, if you wouldn't mind. I completely understand if you can't do that, but it would be really nice to text the grandkids with some pictures so they don't think I'm off my rocker. It would blow their tiny minds." No one addresses Peter's suggestion about the 3 booths. No one says, "Oh, that's a great idea," or, on the other hand, "That's a dumb thing to say." Nothing. Nobody addresses it whatsoever. The gospel says, while Peter was still speaking, the mountaintop was enveloped in a bright cloud, and from the cloud a voice that could only be the voice of God, saying, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Sometimes the best thing we can do is listen. We don't have to do anything. Remember back when Jesus comes up out of the Jordan River after having been baptized by John, Matthew says Jesus saw the heavens opened and heard a voice from above saying, "This is my Son, the beloved, with him I am well pleased." Some biblical scholars believe that Jesus heard the announcement after the baptism, but that it was not a general public announcement. Others went about their business at the Jordan River without having heard anything. Now, on the Mount of Transfiguration, we have a public announcement. Peter, James, and John definitely hear this announcement. This time there's an added sentence, "Listen to him." When the disciples hear this, they fell on the ground. They were terrified. They weren't knocked over by the cloud or by the volume of the voice. When they perceived that it was God speaking to them, they did what any Middle Easterner would do. They fell on the ground in worship and hid their faces. Well, the transcendent moment passes. The terrified disciples are hiding their faces. It was generally understood that no one could see God and live to tell about it. Jesus, now alone, comes to them and touches them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." Well, fear is isolating. It can give us tunnel vision. Every ounce of our being is focused on what we're afraid of. Touch is a way of breaking the fear. We could stand back at 10 paces and repeat, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid," all day, and it wouldn't make any difference. Having raised 2 sons and 2 stepdaughters, I know that sometimes words aren't enough. You can't stand back and just use words to get through to a frightened 5-year-old. You have to get their attention first by touching them. So Jesus comes to the disciples lying fearfully on the ground, and he touches them. It can be like getting let out of jail. The disciples, the gospel writer includes in his account of this amazing, terrifying experience that as it was ending, Jesus touched the terrified disciples and said, "I can't get up," or rather, start that again. Jesus said, "Get up and don't be afraid." No one ever mentions Peter's rather misplaced idea of building temporary shelters at 9,000 feet. Jesus and Peter and James and John go back down the mountain to resume Jesus' ministry of teaching and healing. And on the way down, Jesus says, "Oh, by the way, don't tell anyone about this mountaintop experience until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." There are a number of times the gospel writers describe a saying or a happening and then tell the reader that no one at the time really understood what was going on, or at least at the moment, because it couldn't be understood until after Jesus had been raised from the dead. This event is one of those occasions. No one would be able to fully understand until after the end of the story had been told. And then the pieces would all fall into place. COVID may be largely gone, but it's left its mark, not only on churches, but on all voluntary organizations. We all suffered about a 30% decline in participation since COVID. It has changed the way we do things. For example, it's changed the way we do communion. We all don't drink from a cup or use the same loaf of bread or all handle the same loaf of bread. We're not still passing a plate or tray from one person to the next. And it's been very intentional that for several years, I've not gone to the back of the church to shake everybody's hand after the service is concluded. We're only just beginning to relax about that. COVID discouraged us from touching, and I think that's too bad. Sometimes we need to feel connected, and human touch is a way to do that, especially when we're feeling isolated or lonely or afraid. Sometimes words can't get through to us. Sometimes the words don't work. Sometimes it takes a touch. So there are two things I think we can pull from this passage. Sometimes touch can break fear's hold on us. It may take more than words to get through, and Jesus seemed to understand that. And secondly, when God speaks, it would be best to listen with as much humility and openness as we can muster as flawed human beings. Listening doesn't come easy for us. There are so many things that can get in the way. We can be so afraid that our ears get stopped up. But almost always, what God has to say to us is healing, loving, and for our benefit. Now, God bless you. If you find value in this, I hope you'll pass it along. And God bless you. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon.